We are right now at 7:05, so we're going to be getting started. What's the point of the Schadenfreude? Um, we are going to be talking in this chapter, chapter 13, about what is called the near and far enemies of the boundless abodes, the near and far enemies. We're going to be paying attention this week. Courtney's my scribe. So Courtney, you're going to be typing into the chat so I can remember these two. We're going to be investigating all week both where the boundless abodes arise, I'm going to name them again, where the near enemy of the boundless abode appears, we're going to talk about it, and then where we see its opposite, and its opposite is always the cause of suffering. It is both from suffering, that envy, for let's use that as an example, could even arise. It is out of our own pain that envy can even appear, that cruelty can even appear, and what we do on the spiritual path, I have to say, I think we're a little slicker, is we fall in more often into the near enemies. So rather than compassion, for example, we end up in pity, don't we? We end up in a helper role rather than seeing the other as our true brother or sister, rather than as our equal. We fall into helper or fixer, or because I've got this, I can give it to you. We create an us and a them, a me and a you. Compassion does not distinguish, does it? It knows the truth of suffering. Simply. Compassion knows the truth of suffering. It is no longer, you know this, don't you, in this experience? It's not your suffering, it is the suffering. Right? Isn't it true? The suffering. And by the way, I notice when people are talking about that, that's how they talk about it. They don't say that person, they say it was so difficult watching the suffering because it ignited my pain too. Right? This is the nature of compassion. So we're going to talk about that so that this week we can begin now. Pema's moving into the middle of this book. She's starting to say, now let's be even a little more attentive, a little more aware, a little more embodied in inquiry as it relates to these fine lines that fall on into the polarities of the boundless abodes, which, by the way, have no opposites, really. They have no opposites. Compassion has no opposite. It is not true that fear is the opposite of compassion. And it is also true that we can mask over and graft on aspects or elements of these boundless abodes. And by the way, the point of chapter 13 for me is we have to be honest, don't we, then, with ourselves about the thoughts that are, well, I'm feeling bad for versus I'm feeling sad with. Big difference. Can you feel the difference? I'm feeling bad for you over there, poor homeless people, versus I'm feeling sad, pained, distressed with this truth, which we both are experiencing. Very different. Then the suttas say, and I'll recite just a few lines, then there is no giver. There is no given, there is no gift. You get why that is such an important statement? Then there is no distinction, because there is no helped, helper, and the helping is simply the naturally arising compassion. Do we understand what I'm saying here? We get this deeply, don't we really? Well, Pema says it's a nice idea then, and so do the teachings, to see the very subtle ways we can, through our own distress, through our own suffering, and its strategies to get away from it, right? That's our nature. The brain stems nature, of course, not our true nature, to get some distance from that. To get some distance from that. It isn't only the pain, however, that we then distance from, is it? It is the other, the perceived, constructed, now other. We've made them other, as we began to talk about last week. Okay, I'm going to look at chat, and then we'll start. Schadenfreude. Freud and Schad. Schadenfreude. I like them both. It probably means happy for the other suffering, and seeing suffering and being happy. Is probably the two ways that works. Schadenfreude. Yeah, it's actually also used in psychological circles, and talked about as one of the conditions of suffering, and the way the dysfunctioning or maladaptive or suffering way that we try to get out of suffering. Bullies, I would say. If you think about bullying for a moment, right? Bullying, I think, is Schadenfreude. I think that's, since I am in so much pain, which is, of course, what we know about bullies, right? Often in abusive homes, often neglected or isolated, or in very difficult circumstances. What do? They take that pain, and because they cannot themselves bear it, they inflict pain then on others, right? We all know the consequences of that, and that's maybe a more extreme example, but I want us to get honest this week about all of the ways we move away from protective coat ourselves from the truth of suffering, and the strategies that we use and their consequences. This whole chapter says there is no way out. There is only ultimately through. And to the extent then that we can be slightly open-hearted, that's a training, right? To keep opening to that truth. To that extent, we will be freed. And others, good news, others will be freed too. Isn't it true? Okay, homework this week. Yes, thank you, Courtney, so much. Thank you for your the Google search. Could you guys just hang out with me all day? So when I can have a Google team right here. That would be fabulous. I'm going to see if I can't pop this up for us for just a moment. Remember that last week I asked us to recollect one of these phrases at the end of chapter 12. I want to just use it now as our aspiration. And so as we prepare to sit, with a boundless mind, one could cherish all living beings, radiating friendliness over the entire world, above, below, and all around, without limit. This is the truth of the Bodhisattva path. With a boundless heart mind, that's the bodhicitta, one could cherish all living beings, radiating friendliness over the entire world, above, below, and all around, without limit. This is the path to the end of suffering. We're going to begin today with a little bit of non-meditation meditation, and you have already begun to recognize that eyes open or closed, that both are fine. Because either way, the attention is placed with intention. Eyes open or closed. And my eyes are closed, but my attention has been placed in that space, arms width out from me, in open space. Seeing that you can hear, sense, and feel that sense of open space, which is one of the essential characteristics of bodhicitta. No matter where the mind moves, to thoughts, to sensations, to emotions, this vast, wide, boundless open space, the quality of your own heart mind. This is why we rest here. The quality of your own heart mind is always available. That's you, that vast open space. And we learn with each breath then to relax, to dissolve the solid, separate sense of self, with each out breath dissolving into that open, vast, boundless space. We can use the breath as a guardrail here, directing us on the medium of the breath, directing us into open space. And with the in-breath, breathing into the open, vast, wide, and boundless space of our own bodhicitta, the quality of our own heart mind. Rather than striving, there is a releasing, a settling back and into one's true nature. This cannot be constructed and it cannot die. The practice is relaxing into the vast open space of our true nature, breath by breath, softening the body, placing the mind. And offering one's whole heart to just this present moment. no matter our thoughts about the present moment, our preferences for the objects arising, the experience of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, whatever is arising, we are creating and abiding in open space. We do not mistake any object as self or other. Recognizing thoughts as thoughts, not me, not mine. And resting back once again in the boundless space. The boundless space of bodhicitta, of awareness, of loving kindness and compassion. We can see the murderous thought, the angry thought, the worried thought, the fear-filled thought, the resentment, the disappointment, the grief. We can see it clearly as the truth of our human experience, conditioned arising. And as we see this cause of suffering, this getting caught, this pushing away, we begin to activate that compassionate response. We see the cause of suffering. The binding of that thought to a self, ours or the others. And with the pain of this, we blame, shame, judge, condemn, get angry, shut down. And we're going to see now if we simply can't acknowledge the truth of this human life, acknowledge the reality of suffering, and feel for ourselves and others. Offering that vast open space and that warmth. warmth arises from the knowing this is a part of the human experience. This is the truth of suffering. And once seen clearly, we're going to investigate this in a moment. We can no longer hold ourselves separate. Resting in stability, in that spaciousness. Cultivating stability of mind, equanimity. And then I'd like you to call to mind within this stable heart mind a moment of unskillfulness, your own unskillfulness. You won't have to go far. A moment of autopiloting, a moment of being caught off guard, a moment of unconsciousness, a moment of difficulty. And I caught myself yesterday, as an example only, with a mental judgment. And I was watching another, who is now certainly other, and they're doing something that I have a little bit of a natural aversion to, automatic aversion. And I caught myself with that thought, that othering thought. And rather than buy into the storyline, this other is this, if only that, why this, why not that, I actually caught it well enough that I was able to drop beneath the storyline, get into the body, and feel the distress there. Judgments always come from pain, fear, distress. And I recognized that I was fearful. I was fearful that I was going to be judged by this other's behavior. And rather than explain, rationalize, defend, disregard, I simply stayed in that heart space of fear. Breathing into it, feeling it, and offering open space. And as I did that, actually, what spontaneously happened was my hand went right to my chest. I gasped a little, though likely imperceptibly for others. And I recognized the truth of suffering. I was judging another for fear of being judged. And I simply felt the heart's effect. Do that for yourself now. And what naturally came was compassion for us all. I didn't try for that. I wasn't constructing anything. I could just feel both my natural recognition of suffering and my sadness about its perpetuation and my wish for its end. Naturally. There wasn't anything I needed to do. I didn't need to feel different. I didn't need to stop judging or fearing. It was all available in the recognition, naturally arising compassion. This is the truth of suffering and the path to its end. And as we breathe in, we can, when we're ready, in its natural time, begin to get bigger. We can remember that just like me, others feel this too. This aversion, this fear, this judgment, this moment of confusion, and this moment of clear seeing. Others just like me feel this too. And see if you can then make that offering of compassion, the wish for the end of suffering, gratitude for the clear seeing, and a celebration of the honesty. Because in this moment, we have begun to dissolve that autopiloted cause and effect. It will never happen quite like this again from this scene. It doesn't mean it won't happen again. Not quite as automatic, not quite as lost, not quite as disconnected or habitual. This is the path to the end of suffering. This is also the beginning of the path to forgiveness. As we see clearly the cause of suffering, we begin to create greater space and room. We understand the conditions. I understood my judgment as my own fear. I could feel more for myself in that moment of fear. I could acknowledge it honestly. I didn't have to make sense out of it. I didn't have to judge it. I wasn't evaluating the aversion, the fear, or the judgment. But in the acknowledging itself, I began to be free. See if you don't notice this for yourself. Something said, something thought, maybe an unskillful action. We don't have to defend it, and we don't have to judge it. Both are autopilot strategies. Can we move closer? Breathe into it. See what's there. Fear, pain, the confusion, the doubt. May I be free from this distress and the cause of this distress. May I invite honesty and friendliness so that I can see clearly and then do something different. Rather than the habit of fighting or flighting, may I offer a response. Can I invite wisdom, kindness, compassion? Can I feel genuine care? Can I let the heart get bigger? Above, below, and side to side. You might notice that the friendlier you can become, the more honest you also become. The more compassion we can invite, the clearer the seeing. And the clearer the seeing, the more compassion. And whatever necessary, remember to return to the open space. Always here. Our natural self. This is us. And if you're feeling confused right now, for example, can you feel for yourself and then all those others just like you who are confused just like this? Maybe you're noticing a quality of aversion or not liking. You're not liking the felt sense. You're not liking the practice. You're not liking the feeling. Can you feel for yourself and all those just like you who shut down right in that moment of not liking? This invites that wholehearted honesty. I want it to be different. I don't want it to be the way that it is. I want the other to be different. I have an entire storyline or rationale for why it should be that way. And in this very moment, can I feel for myself? Breathing into the heart of bodhicitta, letting it ignite, that naturally rising response. The wish that I were less fearful, less greedy, less angry, less judgmental, more present, more compassionate, more loving, more clear seeing. Can I simply reside in this present moment, in this body, mind as it is? And open the heart. You're noticing that you're getting worn out. If the thinking is taking over, you're not able to drop beneath the storyline into the felt sense, either the felt sense of the contraction or the open space holding it all. Just come back, rest back in that vast open space of the boundless heart mind, available now. Feeling for all those just like me who get worn out, who have frustration or anger, confusion or doubt. And can I breathe right into that compassionate heart? May we all have happiness and the causes for happiness. May we all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May we all rejoice and be glad at our infinite and continuous blessings, and wish these very blessings for others. May we rest and dwell within the wide open arms of equanimity, free from affliction, from prejudice, from bias, from preference, freeing us from greed, hatred, and ignorance. Breathing that wish in for oneself and out for the others. Recognizing the oneness of this human experience. And so long as time and space endures, and as long as there are beings who exist, may I so too remain to wash away the sorrows of the world. May this practice, this very day, contribute and so, as life is always arising, I had a coughing jag during this meditation, and spent a lot of time thinking, if only this weren't happening, if something else were happening, um, what a real opportunity for me then to simply let what was happening be happening. Um, without then what worry, judgments, fear, uh, you know, and could I feel then, and I absolutely did, for all those who want to convey something and can't speak or want to, right, be still and have something happening, or want to cultivate silence and there's the burp or the grip or the whatever's happening. Can we um, get big enough? Big enough. And big enough then means what? Not caught in the old habit of fighting or flighting, of judging, condemning, criticizing, hating, devaluing, right, in all of its versions. And then can I feel for myself and those others who didn't say the right thing, who didn't uh, get it right, who didn't chew it slowly enough, who didn't right, whatever, and that we keep coming back again and again. This is where the practice serves us best, in its repetition, right? Again and again. You're going to see it as many times as needed to go, okay, got it again, yay for me. Yay for me. How many times then I'm regularly asked, will I have to see fear before I get rid of it? How many times? What's the answer to that? How many times am I going to have to see that before I can get rid of it? Courtney, you're on. How many times?
As many as it takes.
As many as it takes not to want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you go. As many times as it takes not to keep pushing it away. That many times. Not to go, I'm doing this so I can get rid of it. Because that's an incredible striving. That's an incredible preference. That's an incredible, right, reactivity. That's an amazing condemning. What if we were just with fear? What would it mean? Really, what would it mean? What would fall apart if you just stayed with fear? The fear would actually eventually fall apart. Yeah, except I don't like it either. I want to go to the place where there isn't any fear. And so then where do we begin? Well, exactly where we are. Don't we? Right here, exactly where we are, with fear like this. Yesterday, where was I? With judgments just like this. Judgments just like this over really something so inconsequential, really. But I have to recognize, yes, that fear finds its way into the crevices. Yes, it does. If you'd only choose slower, this would be better. Yep, there I was. And it was fear. I really made contact. I could feel its physical vibration going. There's a person sitting next to, they're going to be going, what the hell is this guy is inhaling this food. Right. And can I recognize that without now condemning myself? See, this is no improvement. Is there? There's no improvement here to go, well, then that person's a jerk because they're eating too fast. She's a jerk because she's judging them, or I'm a jerk because I'm in fear. Right. There's no benefits there. Right. We're just all caught. And that's not useful. It's 8 o'clock. I know some of you need to go. Thank you for being here. We're going to go to the chapter to see if we can't find some of Pema's wisdom as it relates to these practices. And I don't have this on share. Sorry, I just realized it wasn't happening. Hopefully, let me put this back up there. can see that. Can everybody see that? Remember that I said that meeting the enemy is the name of this chapter. And of course, we use words like this just to really give us the idea. Enemy, of course, is not completely the right word ultimately, but it gives us the sense, I think, that greeting what we don't like, greeting what we don't want, it's not a true enemy. We've made it an enemy, is actually true by our resistance, by our rejection, by our struggle, by our not wanting, by our gripping it and not wanting it to change or let it go, right? That is actually the cause of suffering. Nothing in the object. We have to keep remembering this, don't we? There was nothing in my husband's chewing that was the problem by itself. That was just chewing happening, rising and passing. It was then what? My, this is, wow, he's in him. She's sitting there going, my God, I can't believe this guy ate an entire thing of linguine in 30 seconds. That was amazing. And my fear, there it was. My fear about that judgment and my own. Right, so let's take a look. Here's Joko Beck, my teacher, quoted in chapter 13, with unfailing kindness. Boy, can't you see that now? Doesn't this make really good sense why she starts the sentence with this? Unfailing, ongoing, undying, again and again, forever. Unfailing. Like we've got to be willing to be friendly with our experience. Your life always presents what you need to learn. She said this to me 10,000 times. I growled at her 11. No, I don't like, right? Well, this is the teacher. She would say, that's the teacher. And I would think, I don't like that. Right? Here is the truth. It has taken me another 20 years of practice, or 25, to go, the minute I clearly see the situation, the truth is it is no longer suffering. If I am in suffering, it is because I am not clearly seeing. And that's just the facts. It doesn't mean it's not painful. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean you don't cry when the person you love dies. It's not true. It means you just cry. No problem. You get the difference? You just cry. You go, that's sad. The person I loved is gone. They're not here like this. And all the philosophies, all the Yogananda quotes about how no one really dies, no, Thich Nhat Hanh, really we're only just a cloud dispersing, changes the truth of that pain. And it's never supposed to. That's not it. Can I just cry and let it be grief? Without all the got to get rid of it, got to make it more, can I just let it be? Your life always presents what you need to learn. The lesson that's here, whether you stay home or work in an office or whatever, the next teacher, let's call it the next moment, is going to pop right up. Because there it is. Everyone counts. All helpful. The essence of bravery is being without self-deception. I loved that line. The essence of our true fearlessness is not coding over our habits, but being honest about them. My fear caused that judgment about the person in front of me. And I have to be willing to take some kind of ownership, don't I? I have to be willing to recognize my own pain, my own fear, my own confusion, my own ignorance in this. If I'm not willing to do that with honesty and friendliness, the two key, then the truth is I'm going to perpetuate that very suffering. I am going to perpetuate it. And it will cause harm. And it will cause harm. And that's also guaranteed, whether it's to me and the other. Right? It's not so easy to take a straight look at what we do, our habits and our habit nature. Seeing ourselves clearly is often uncomfortable. We often go into self-loathing, self-judgment, self-deprecation, self-hatred. We make a self right out of our habits rather than seeing clearly with that vast, open, compassionate space that we create. Rather than see the distress and respond, we judge ourselves and make it us. There's me judging the other. This is the continuation of suffering. It has to be with clear seeing my own pain, my own fear, my own habits for judgment, pettiness, arrogance must be recognized with compassion itself. These are not sins, she goes on to say. And the reason we say sin is because it is not a moralistic perspective. It is not a right and wrong perspective. It is that which contributes to suffering and that which contributes to its end. Those are understood to be immutable facts. Nothing about opinion, nothing about judgments or morality involved. The more we get to know our own habits, the more they lose their power. This happens every single time we recognize. I know it's frustrating. I know we are not patient. I know we wish, well, now I've seen it. Why can't it just be gone? And the truth is, patience must be cultivated here also. I'm going to have to judge maybe in that way and see it maybe 10,000 times before I can truly be freed from that moment of reactivity, that moment of autopiloting. I don't know. By the way, this one felt a little powerful for me because I caught it so quick. I neither had to make the face. I didn't have to give this eye stare. I didn't think, oh my God, I can't take you anywhere because you're going to eat like this in front of everyone. None of that old stuff happened. I saw it. I was able to drop right beneath it and feel the fear. I am going to be judged. I'm going to be judged for this. And then I could feel for myself. That's how that began. And then for the poor soul being judged. The more we get to know our proclivities, I'll use that word for now, the more they will lose their power. We do not trust this, but it would be useful if we could. Every time you recognize you have loosened the grip and also invited neuroplasticity, says the science. A warrior begins to take responsibility for the direction of her life. That doesn't mean every circumstance is your fault. That's not what that's saying. How you then hold, respond, relate to it is something you have some agency and authority in. Let's go on to the next page. The near and far enemies. This is something that I want us to review because I want us to look at this. So the first boundless abode is loving kindness, sometimes called Maitri or Metta in Sanskrit. Within loving kindness, there are some habit natures that we watch for. One of the habit natures of love, I'll just say that simply, is what? Attachment. I want to keep it. I want it to be a certain way. I want it to give me something. I develop an attachment relationship, and she names a couple relationships that she says we really got to be careful in the attachment habit, the near enemy of love. What is it? With partners. very challenging to have a relationship with partners without moving into, I want it a certain way. I want you to be a certain way. I want it to feel a certain way, right? Very seductive, isn't it? Parents and children. Oh boy, right? You gotta be, I gotta be, we gotta be together. A lot of attachments, perspective taking, a lot of what needs to happen, what's supposed to happen, and a lot of suffering. And the spiritual relationship between a teacher and a student can be very much attached. My students have to be good because I want them to represent me. If they're not free from suffering, oops, it's my fault and I've got to do something else. There's a lot that comes with being a teacher and the habits that we work through. Early on, I remember as a teacher, I would think, who am I to do this? I mean, I got to quit this because I'm fucking up all over the place. How in the world am I going to do this when every day I notice reactivity, every day I catch judgments, every day I noticed I said something unskillful. Well, this is not the point at all. It isn't about being perfect. It's about recognizing. Could I see it? Well, I saw it so much I could barely stand it because I wasn't yet able to bring compassion. I was just seeing it to the table. That lenshak word is a Tibetan word, by the way, not a Sanskrit or Pali word that means being caught, I would say, rather than in love that's just free in its flow. We get trapped or caught by some element of attachment to it. So that's the near enemy. The far enemy, of course, of loving kindness would be something like hatred, aggression. I actually believe at its heart, the far enemy of loving kindness is actually fear. To tell you the truth, I think it looks aggressive, right, angry, but really what's under that? It's fear. Plain and simple. When we know this, we don't then react as much to anger and aggression with other anger and aggression as we're likely to do when we forget that. Well, can we remember that in ourselves? My almost saying something about the way somebody was chewing their food was completely based on fear. It would have looked rather petty and angry, wouldn't it? It would have looked that way, but really at the heart, it's I was so afraid of being judged that I was going to judge another, and I was going to do so somewhat righteously, except I could see it, right? The end of suffering right there. Love is not based on need. It's not based on expectations. It's not based on preferences at all. That is limited love. That always comes with attachments and preferences. Where that exists, the truth is it is not in its essence. It's compromised in some way. Just seeing it and knowing its contractions useful, I think. The far enemy, here we go, is hatred or aversion. We've already talked about that. I love feeling into the tight spot of that. This is an important line, which is why I made it pink on the page. Where we feel the tightness is the soft spot of bodhicitta. We forget this all the time. We catch the tight spot, we catch the contraction, we catch the hatred, but we forget that just right there is the soft spot of the Bodhi heart. The one who can see can abide. The one who can abide can respond. The heart of bodhicitta is right there. So watch it, because when we go into judgment, over our own contractedness, our own aversion, our own not wanting, and our own habits, we have deprived ourselves of this real opportunity to feel for ourselves and others and ignite the Bodhi heart. I love this line also, just at the moment when tears could come to our eyes out of the truth of suffering, we pull back and do something mean. I thought that was terrific. Just we get, right? Rather than feel for ourselves and the other in this moment of difficulty. We get righteous, we get arrogant, we get judgmental. Easier, and costs you and I everything. It costs us everything. And she gives an example of Freddie in prison and how the pain of the other prisoners and their compassionate response for Freddie, who just lost his grandmother, they did not leave him. I've heard this story from Pema directly, as told to her by Jarvis, her friend on death row. And it makes me cry every time. The nature of the compassionate heart. So open. So open. There are 3 near enemies then to the next boundless abode of compassion. I had never heard this before because I had never heard about the overwhelm. Though when I read it, I was like, of course, this makes right sense. The 3 near enemies, they look compassionate, but in fact are not quite. One is, of course, pity, right? I'm feeling for the other as if they are lower. I pity them. I am not equal. I do not have equanimity in this. I do not recognize this as myself and my own suffering. I go, oh, poor you. Oh, poor you. Like, which distinguishes that from, oh, poor me. I know this too, right? Oh, you have the problem. You have the other near enemy is overwhelmed. This happens a lot, I notice, for ecological activists. They get burnt out a lot. They get overwhelmed, which is another tree goes down. What am I going to do? We can't stand it. People are still throwing away their recycling. This is never going to end. And they get overwhelmed and they collapse back in their own suffering. Rather than recognizing the cause of suffering and pursuing its path to the end, they get overwhelmed by the suffering themselves and they collapse. They burn out, right? This happens often to lots of workers, for example, in child protective services. They so take on the suffering of others, they are no longer able to see clearly the path to its end, and they collapse in it. And so that's a consequence that is very painful to see, especially for social service workers, for healthcare workers, right? The suffering just becomes too much for them. Our first responders and those responding to trauma frequently have to deal with this near enemy of overwhelm or burnout. And then idiot compassion. This is one I like a lot and want to speak to for a moment because I think we do it way too much. And that is, well, what are you going to do? And so you let the wrong thing happen. You don't set an appropriate boundary. You don't say, no, we can't do that. You don't say, she used the word enough. That's enough. We're not doing that anymore. And that's going to perpetuate suffering in a really damaging and destructive way. We often misperceive that as compassion. And you see people go like this. Like, what are you going to do? That's helplessness and hopelessness, isn't it? I don't know. What are you going to do? Right? That's not response. That is not the responding from compassion, because in feeling for the truth, in seeing it clearly, you would go, oh, no, we're not. We're not going to do that again. Oh, no, no, no. That's going to cause harm to everyone. But it is not out of, I don't like that. It's out of seeing clearly harm is going to be the result of that. Harm for me, harm for you, harm for us all. And so watch that, because we often do not set appropriate limits. We avoid conflict. We avoid having to take a stand, don't we? Well, no, not me. I'm not going to do it. And by the way, we mistake the taking of a stand as being hostile or aggressive rather than loving. Rather than loving. The most loving response when your child is trying to stick the key in the electric socket is no. That will hurt you. We can't do that, but it is not out of aggression and hostility. It is with clarity, right? With clarity. And out of that clarity, there can be a solid expression. It's not weakened by fear. It's no, we're not going to do that. She gives another example of a lovely woman who was not able to feel too much. It was too much for her to feel for her son. And so she could turn down the news. I thought this was very lovely, and could feel for the team that had just lost the football game. And she could begin there to go, I can feel for them in their loss. I can't yet feel for my heroin addicted son. I can't yet feel for the families of people in addiction. That was too much, but I can really feel compassionate here. And so she began, we start where we are, don't we? And what is that? We start where we are. And that is still progress, movement, and cultivation. We don't collapse back. We begin where we can. If we can't shift our attention into a larger frame, into getting bigger, perhaps, she says, the one thing we could do, and it's what I started with yesterday. I couldn't recognize the storyline immediately. I just caught the grip. I caught the snark. I dropped beneath the storyline just into my own heart. I could do that. I turned back to myself instead of keeping the storyline about the other. I got back in my own heart. My hand spontaneously came up and I went, because I could feel the fear there. And this might be the perfect beginning. I can't unhook it. I can't feel different. I can't change what's happening, but I can at least begin to feel for myself in this moment of distress. Can I feel the physical, somatic experience? Yes, you can. Do you have to feel a certain way? No. Do you have to be compassionate even? Not necessarily. Could you just name the physiology? Tight like this, hot like this, numb like this, gripped like this, blocked like this. Oh, yes, you could. Would that be movement towards the boundless abodes? Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And so name them. Call them out. Call them out. Ow. Just like this. Feeling that energy is going to inform you. You don't have to think a thing. We mistake this. You don't have to think a thing. You don't have to think this is that. What about this? What about that? It'd be better if I didn't feel this. It'd be better if I could feel some other way. That's just storyline, actually. Don't think anything. Can I feel the grip? Can I feel the tightness? Can I feel the truth of suffering? And the answer is yes, you can. Drop beneath that big storyline you've got. If only that other wasn't being them, this could all be great. The third near enemy of compassion is that not setting appropriate boundaries. We talked about that. The far enemy of compassion is cruelty. Remember, I again think ultimately it's fear. And yes, it looks aggressive. It looks rejecting. It looks angry. It looks hateful. And I know that to be fear. I know that to be fear. And the protection of that tenderness with a big armor, right? With a big armor. The angrier, the harder, the more rejecting. It took me all of my brother's life to recognize what was true about him, was that he was the most sensitive one of all, because he looked so hardened. No, he was the most vulnerable of all of us. And we didn't get that figured out till he was done. Right? Because we mistook it as you've got it together, you're just doing your thing, all kinds of storylines about that. Right? But can we recognize all aggressions as a defense, really, against our vulnerability? And then what? Then you cry, don't you? And you cry for the truth of it. The near enemy of joyfulness, that is the third boundless abode, is mania, really. It's overly activated. It's a little out of control. It's a little too giddy, a little too, it doesn't have much regard for others in it, right? It's just escaping energies. I can see this in younger children most easily, right? They get a little hyper, right? A little overexcited, a little overactivated, and then they lose regulation. We call that dysregulated. They can't even contain it. They're all over the place. And then sometimes dangerous or bad things happen because it's out of control. Authentic joy does not have a euphoric state, it says here, it's correct. That doesn't mean it's not contentedness, but there's a stability in it. It is not a come and go as it is with euphoria, which cannot be a sustainable state. That one comes and goes. In fact, often with euphoria, guess what comes? The other side, the down, and it's often painful and big and overwhelming as well. Authentic joy is stable, not birth and deathing. It doesn't come and go. It's just always available, right? And it's in celebration of the blessings and appreciation. The far enemy of joy is envy. This is that Schadenfreude word that we talked about, and it's not possible, but it looks like the person, that bully, is taking joy in seeing the suffering in the victim. It's not true. It is getting it off of oneself. I've got to get out of this feeling in me, and now I'm able to get it out and onto you. And the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. This is the Zen practitioner's number one dilemma, often, which is disconnect. It's not compassionate. It's indifferent. It's not caring. It's disconnected. It's an amazing spiritual bypass. It's not being in life. It's being some distance from it. Like you are the witness of all of life happening over there, but not really experiencing yourself. It's a mind state, a big habit, and it's grafted on. There is no wisdom in it. It is defensive completely. Some people use, what was that thing they used to say? I used to have a friend say this a lot as a way of distancing. Well, it is the way it is. Instead of feeling for that experience, this person would frequently make the state, well, it just is the way it is. It was like, right, it just is the way it is. Well, what about that being the way it is? What about that truth, if it is the way it is? And how is that? And they didn't have anything to say, right? It was like, no, I just want that line and I want to get away from this. The far enemy of equanimity, as we know, is things like racism. Any ism is some distance from equanimity, to too much into the prejudice, too much into the view, too much into the side taking to see clearly. All of these enemies are good teachers. They show us that we can accept ourselves and others complete with our vulnerabilities. I'm going to let you look at 14 on your own. It's lovely. It's very, very short. It's a 2-minute read. We're going to start next week with chapter 15, strength, and the 5 strengths, these qualities of heart mind that we cultivate so that we can see more clearly. So let's look at chapter 15. This week's practice then is, can we catch the near and far enemies? Can we notice the imbalance, the dysregulations on either side, the protective coding that we often put on in the near enemies? They're a way around the truth of suffering. We don't really want to take it on. We've grafted something on with the near enemy. With the far enemy, it's the opposite of whatever you were experiencing. And the bully is a good example of that. Rather than feeling the pain of their own vulnerability, they displace that onto another so as to get away from it. All of these are ways out of the experience of difficulty, of suffering, and of the truth of pain. Let's look for them this week. I might do a little chart, I think, with just little words that you can capture to hold on to this. Today I have a little time because I think being able to hold it is going to be challenging. But I think if we can just go this versus this, that I think we'll maybe do a little bit better. So you can count on that from me today. Otherwise, I think we're going to get lost in what is this. So I'll name the abode in the middle, then I'll put what's the near enemy, what's the far enemy. It's probably a word or two just to give you a sense of it. I'm going to recommend that you print that, to tell you the truth. Print it so you can go, okay, where might I be right now in this moment? Okay, how does that sound? I know we're a little after, but I want to make sure that we got through the near and far enemies. They are hindrances we want to be able to recognize. We want to recognize them, especially when we do things like go into indifference, right? And look at the way that will propagate pain and harm. All right, everyone, thank you so much. I am grateful for you all. My love to you. Thursday, we have 7 o'clock with Greg. Saturday, we'll be in the garden. Please, everyone who's still here, I'll put the newsletters coming out today. It will remind everyone about St. Andrew's. And we were going to go yesterday, couldn't get there. When I got to the Dollar Tree, there was very little there. So they said they'd get a delivery on Wednesday. So I'm gonna wait till later in the week. Very few cans of things that could be useful to the St. Andrews Food Pantry. And thank you, everyone. We've collected over $300 so far. Thank you, and thank you. Lots of people stepped up. I appreciate all of you so much. And so will the families who we are serving during this cold, cold winter. Cold, cold, and cold. So thank you all so much. I was hoping to get some healthy choice soups at the Dollar Tree. They were all gone. But hopefully Wednesday we can get some more and get some warm soup in some cold bellies. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your presence and your practice. Thank you. Good to see you all. All right. See you on Saturday.